And we're back on Second Street, and with Halloween just around the corner, we're talking about scary government policies, but I think we're at the best part of the discussion today where we're talking about treats, things that governments could do to actually help people, just like you might get a treat when you go trick-or-treating on Halloween. Tristin, I'll come to you on this. What are some of the other policies that you think should be happening in this country? I mean, there's so many different crises. We've talked about a whole bunch of them already. We've got a drug crisis, a cost of living crisis, the debt's well over $1 trillion. We've got all these issues. What do you think, what else could be done that would have a tangible impact on Canadians in their day-to-day lives?
So in the sort of hard category I mentioned before, fixing, I mean, we've been racking up housing and affordability for, it's exacerbated in the last 10 years, but we've been doing it for 20, 25 years. So there are things you can start to do in that sense, but it would take a while because we essentially have to build, 3 million homes, change a bunch of structural things for whatever reason. And then that's also true when I mentioned addictions earlier. So the alternative to just giving people free drugs forever is a treatment option. And Alberta has pursued that. It's very expensive. It takes a while. The results are faster than they thought, but it's not immediate. So that's sort of on the hard thing. But again, as I mentioned, there's a bunch of very simple things you can do almost with orders in council. So that's the Canadian executive order or on day one policies. We don't really do day one policies in Canada, but
Yeah.
we make an exception for this. But on the issue of addictions, just immediately put a halt to safer supply. You can do that from the federal level. So this is the policy pursued in BC and I think parts of Ontario, where the idea is if they just give out government opioids, one of the many policies that people think I'm making up when I just tell a normie who's not sort of plugged into politics, where you prescribe recreational opioids, and the idea is that someone who's an addict will just take the safe recreational opioids, and they won't use the black market. Thus they don't need to steal, and they're not going to get tainted drugs. But what we've seen instead, massive amounts of diversion. So people are just getting the recreational drugs, flipping them for money, and then just continuing to buy on the black market. So now you got a whole bunch of super cheap government supplied opioids on the black market, which are ending up in the hands of teens. So that's a very easy fix. Stop handing out drugs all the time. Fixed. Or another thing related to drugs, to stop BC decriminalization. So we saw recent efforts to sort of dial it back a little bit, where you can't scream and threaten people in a playground, but you can do it slightly beyond the playground. You could just end that. So there's any number of just bad ideas where all the government has to do is just stop today.
Stop what it's doing. All right, Kris, Tristin just solved the drug crisis. You talked a little bit before about solving some of the affordability problems out there. You often advocate for tax reductions. People often say, okay, well then you have to, that has to correspond with a reduction in spending. What would be some of the spending reductions that could be cut that everyday people just simply won't notice?
Oh, goodness. Reduce the size of the bureaucracy, period. The Trudeau government has added more than 100,000 people to the dole and the rank of federal bureaucrats. That is more than the population of Red Deer. So reduce that. Make it sacrosanct within government to ask themselves, could this be done cheaper? And could this be done by a private group? Must we do this? They need to use the rules of Dr. Sowell when they ask, at what cost, compared to what, and what hard data do you have? If they asked themselves those three questions by that brilliant economist, we would be a lot better off. And people would be a lot better off. Because people often say, okay, well, what do you want to cut? No. Stop and think about the amount of government service and the level of government service you get when you come into contact with a bureaucrat, especially a federal one. Is it awesome? Probably not. So they need to cut. And then they need to scrap the carbon tax. Just to give you an idea, the truckers came out recently and said it cost them $2 billion a year, the carbon tax. That is then taxing everything that moves. Trudeau's taxing everything that moves. It's no wonder that we can't afford stuff. So do those two things.
All right. Well, that sounds like a pretty good list to start with, guys. Thank you both for taking a few minutes to share some of the spookier policies that are happening right now in Canada. And again, that's Tristin Hopper, the National Post, and Kris Sims with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation.